There's a fairly simple trail over in the mountains west of us that my wife and my daughters and I used to like to hike. And one day we went to hike that trail, as we had done many times before. And after some really strong spring storms, we found a section of the trail we couldn't travel on. We couldn't go any further because there was a tree laying across the path. We're not talking about a little tree. We're talking about a tree as big around, taller than I am, laying on its side. We couldn't get over it. And it stretched way on up the hillside this way and way down in the ravine this direction. And we had to turn around and go back. It stopped our progress. Your actions as a believer, if they are not done in love, and if they are done just because you are looking out for what you can do, they can be like that huge tree. They can impede the progress of other believers. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we are looking at how believers become stable and the role that a stable believer can play in helping those believers become stable, or at least not getting in God's way. Verse 13 here of Romans 14, Paul says, "Therefore, let us no longer judge one another." It's time to quit judging each other on these things. Whether you're judging them going, "Oh, you came short because you ate that meat offered to an idol," or "You're so ridiculous because you're still fussing over those things." Quit judging, he says. Rather, judge this, not to place, and he uses these two different words here, a stumbling block. This first word meant something that was in the way that as you're going on a trail, you tripped over it. That's happened many times as I've tromped around in the timber, that you catch your toe on a rock or a root and you stumble. That's that term. The second term, you trip up your brother, but the second word is this word stumbling block that sounds more like the thing you trip over, but it's actually referred to a snare or a trap that caught a person's foot, not making them trip so much as catching them so that they couldn't go. Or if you sometimes talked in more militaristic fashion, that you would have armies that sometimes would put large obstacles in the path to keep soldiers and artillery from moving ahead, and it would impede their progress. And Paul says, let's not do that. Let's not trip these other believers up, and let's not put something in their way that catches them and gets them stuck there or keeps them from making any further progress. He says that's the thing we ought to judge. Judge not to be more of a problem. Verse 14, "I know and I'm convinced in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean of itself." Really? Yeah. When God declared certain things unclean in the Old Testament, he did so, clearly the book of Leviticus says this, to draw a line of distinction between his people Israel and the Gentiles. It wasn't because those things were naturally unclean. And I'm not here to defend all of that doctrine. We could maybe do that at another time. But it's very clear in the book of Leviticus what the purpose of that was. So the thing wasn't unclean of itself. But now that we have moved away from the law and we're not under the law anymore, guess what? There is no such thing as an unclean item of food. There is no such thing as unclean meat anymore. That's all done. Paul says that we can eat anything if we receive it with thanks and supplication, or intercession, I believe it is. So he says, rather, he says, but to the one who thinks or logically counts something to be common or unclean, to that person it is. Yes, so this is a matter of, so this is a gray area, because you can have a person that, well, that's not a common thing. I can eat that. God says I can. But you're going to have some believers that are going to be going, but I don't know. And they're stuck. And they don't progress. And so as Paul stops and thinks about these people, he says, you need to take them into account. Why? For if because of food, clearly what he's talking about, your brother is put to grief, you are no longer walking in accord with love. Now we'll come back and we'll pick up the rest of this later. But for today, just stop to think about the fact that if you look at your ability to do something as a right, I have authority to do this, And that is more important to you than how it affects that other believer. He says you're not acting in love. You can say you're acting in love all day long, but you're not. And guess what, as believers? We should not be defined by the foods we avoid eating, by the clothing that we choose not to wear. That's not appropriate clothing, some people might say. Or by the day we observe, or by the type of clothing we do choose to wear. We shouldn't be defined by those. We should be defined, as Jesus said in John 13:35, by the love we have for one another, the kind of love he demonstrated to us. He says it's by this that all will know you're my disciples, not by the fact that we're keeping these standards. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul makes this statement over here in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 7. He says, however, not all people have this knowledge, and that is the knowledge that an idol is nothing. But some, being accustomed to the idol right up until now, they eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol. In other words, when they eat that meat, they're very, very, very conscious of this fact because they had participated in this. And as a result, his conscience is weak, it's defiled. He says food, it's not going to bring you closer to God. If you don't eat, you're not worse. If you do eat, you're not better. Just realize eating or not eating isn't going to alter your relationship with God. This is what Paul's been getting at in Romans 14. That's a key concept to get if you're ever going to become stable. Take care then that your freedom, and the New American Standard is freedom, but it's actually this word exousia. It means authority. You have this authority to choose to eat what you want to eat. Nobody else is going to tell you what you can and can't eat anymore. And sometimes that becomes so significant to hold on to that authority that as a result, we're not even going to let another brother's weak conscience get in the way of our enjoying that thing that we want to eat. But part of the problem is, he says, if these people see you and you have strength and they see you maybe eating in an idol's temple, he's going to express this later, maybe they know that you're eating meat offered to an idol, even if it's not in an idol's temple. And it says his conscience is weak, and it might be strengthened or built up to eat the thing sacrificed to the idol. And through your knowledge, then, the one who is weak is ruined. You actually can cause some real serious delay in his maturing process. That's something really to take seriously. For you to think about, how do my actions affect another believer? I want to love this other brother. I don't want to try to push him to mature faster than God's taking him, and as a result, cause his progress to be impeded, cause him to trip up. And in this context, part of the way he might do that is he sees you eating, and he goes, well, he's been saved longer than I have, and so I guess I will do it. And he's not doing it out of faith, convinced that it will not affect his relationship with God. He's simply doing it because you're doing it. He's copying your actions. It's not the way it should be. They should do it out of faith. And that's something that they're going to have to come to, that realization that that's God's promise. And you can teach that to them, but that doesn't mean they get it. And so Paul reminds us over here in, again, Romans 14:15, for because of food your brother or sister is grieved, you're no longer walking in accordance to love. If you put your authority to eat this or that in front of them, that's not love. You can tell yourself it is, but it's not love. Paul tells you it's not love. And it hurts them, causes them grief. And we don't want to cause them grief. We want to encourage them to have a right attitude about their relationship with God, to appreciate what God's done. And with that, you can be encouraging those people, just like we ourselves, encouraging them to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.